Hello students, this is Dr. Willis. I'm making a video this is going over how to avoid plagiarism, synthesizing our sources, and some basics of MLA documentation. This video is really made to apply to all my composition and literature classes. Anything that uses MLA documentation, you can use this as a guide. So let me go ahead and do a screen share, and I will start the PowerPoint. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so this is plagiarism and synthesizing sources. Really, should be titled, I guess, avoiding plagiarism, but I think the big, bold plagiarism is more attention-grabbing, so there we have it. So try not to look at the bottom of the screen if you can, but if you look at this thing, we have this strange apparatus on a bird, and what this thing is a bird diaper. There's a US patent for it. I actually just had to look up the new website to make sure that this was current with MLA documentation, but you can click on this link and check out there's about 5 pages of stuff about this bird diaper. Now, most of us know that patents are important. Why are they important? Well, they protect intellectual property, people's ideas, so nobody can steal them and profit from them. Well, what we're working with in an academic course is somewhat similar in that we're protecting intellectual property, and we have copyrights and also just ethical obligations to give credit where credit is due. So I know if you're watching this in English 101, the definition chapter of your book tells you not to start with the dictionary definition, but I'm going to go against the grain anyway. Definition of plagiarism: to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own. To use another's production without crediting the source. Notice that I put in bold ideas or words of another. That's because we all know that if we copy and paste somebody's idea and use it as our own, from the internet, that's not right, that's stealing. But to avoid plagiarism in an academic paper, you also have to cite ideas that you take from a source. And that's the distinction that many students sometimes struggle with. So words or ideas. So if you're using a direct quote or you're paraphrasing, both need to get credit. Okay, so what's wrong with plagiarism? When I'm doing this PowerPoint in class, I ask the class, what's wrong with plagiarism? And the most typical answer is it's stealing. Most of us have some sort of ethical or moral makeup that says that stealing is wrong, but it's also unethical. You're not doing your own work when you don't cite correctly. This is very important in academics, to do our own work, because we're here to learn. Yes, we're here to get a degree so we can get a good job, but also we're here to learn. And if you're just copying other people's work, you're not really learning as much as you could. Okay, so at Coastal here, there are some consequences for plagiarizing, and they range from getting an F or a 0 on the assignment to being kicked out of school. Now, in my case, every single plagiarism case for me is a case-by-case basis. I look at the effort that was made to cite sources correctly. I look at websites that may or may not have been used, and I will deal with you individually with each case of plagiarism if it's accidental or on purpose. Now, in my composition courses, oftentimes I encounter accidental plagiarism, where people either didn't work hard enough or just don't have enough practice yet with citation to get it correct. Generally speaking, I will work to an extent with those folks. But if you're just copying and pasting something from a website, well, then that's going to be dealt with more severely. So just keep in mind it's on a case-by-case basis with plagiarism. Now, before anybody freaks out about failing or getting kicked out of school or anything, do understand that something that's considered general knowledge for your audience does not have to be cited. Now, general knowledge is audience dependent. For most papers in my classes, I consider the audience to be your classmates, so 18 to whatever year old college students. Well, so general knowledge for that audience is going to differ from, say, a trade publication. You can use a lot of technical language and jargon in a trade publication because your audience is going to know that stuff already. So here's some examples of stuff that's general knowledge versus something you'd have to cite. For your audience, Coastal Alabama is a community college in Alabama. Okay, that's something your audience is going to know. Now, if I were to say in a paper there are a series of tunnels under the Bruton campus built in World War II, the Neal building on the Bruton campus was constructed by superheroes, or Elvis Presley wrote a song about Mickey Mouse. As far as I know, these are all fabrications, but these are examples of specialized knowledge, excuse me, that you would have to cite for your audience. But whenever in doubt, cite the source. Taking a little bit of extra time to cite every sentence where you get ideas from a source is important. And notice I said after every sentence. Some of you may be watching this who had a little bit of research stuff in high school where your teacher told you, oh, just cite at the end of every paragraph. Well, if you do that, the audience can't tell the difference between your work and work that comes from a source. So because of that, it's crucial that we cite every idea that comes from a source, so our audience can differentiate between our ideas and ideas that come from source material. So again, make sure you're citing after every sentence that comes from a source. I grade papers with a word count in mind, so extra citations means easy word count. Okay, so there's 3 ways to cite sources, and part of the reason I'm showing you this is my composition classes will be watching this, and you may be asked to use different types of citation depending on the class. In English classes like this one, we use the Modern Language Association, or MLA. But in a lot of places you're going to see the APA, American Psychological Association. And if you're in history and some humanities courses, they're going to use the Chicago Manual of Style. The important thing is any class that you get into, that you know what the teacher expects you to use. Okay, so using another writer's ideas without plagiarizing. We can do it in 3 ways: quoting, paraphrasing, and summary. Quoting is using the exact words of the author, using quotation marks, and citing it. Paraphrasing is taking the author's ideas and rewording them into our own words. We're still using that author's ideas, we're just not using the exact words. But it needs to have significant changes. Now, when I say significant, there's not a formula that works for that. Some people might think it's like every other word, every 3 words, or whatever it might be. That isn't really good enough. I tend to use or think of the Supreme Court's, and forgive me for this, but the Supreme Court's definition of pornography, where a justice famously said, I know it when I see it. Significant changes to the original wording are similar. Most people, or a reasonable person, would know it when they saw it. They could look at the original and look at how you put it into your own words and say, yes, those are significant changes. And summarizing is giving the basic idea. Generally speaking, with summary, you are condensing a large amount of information into a condensed space. So you might, for example, summarize the primary ideas of an entire article in just a couple of sentences, 2 or 3 sentences. Okay. Note, a paraphrase is going to be about the same length as the original because you're taking a single idea and putting it into your own words, whereas a summary is going to be much shorter. Okay, now to avoid plagiarism, we have to cite in 2 places. Because all of these ways to use another writer's work involve using someone else's words or ideas, you must give credit in 2 places: inside the paper and on the works cited page. Parenthetical citation means a citation within parentheses. So here's an example of a parenthetical citation. The devastation to towns and residences frequently lasts through 2 generations. Docker 74. Docker would be the author, 74 would be the page number. Notice there's no comma in between Docker and 74. The period goes after the parentheses, not before. But also you need to cite on the works cited page. Here's an example using the MLA 8th edition. Author's last name first, brief history of natural disasters. The journal is in italics. City, publisher, year, and page numbers. Okay. With the new edition of the MLA, we do not put the medium, so we don't say print, web, whatever it might be. Signal phrases. Before I get to some examples of paraphrase, quote, and summary, I want to talk a little bit about signal phrases. In order to smoothly integrate your quotes, paraphrases, and summaries with your own words, you need to incorporate signal phrases into your writing. Avoid dropping quotations, paraphrases, and summaries into the text without warning. UFQ stands for unidentified flying quotes. In grad school, a colleague of mine came up with this term, and I think it's a good one. It's a quote that sounds good, but isn't fit into the argument. It's kind of shoehorned into the paragraph. And believe me, we've all been guilty of doing this on occasion, but you need to avoid doing it in your paper. Provide clear signal phrases, including at least the author's last name and or the article title to indicate the boundary between your words and the source's words. So according to Smith, he says, blah, blah, blah. Just you're tipping off to the reader that you're using information that didn't come from you. So you can create a synthesis between your ideas and the ideas of the source material. So let's break down this process. One, we need to provide context. Tell your reader where a quotation or information from a source fits within its source. For example, why a certain author introduces the idea you've quoted, where it fits in the work, or what the quotation means. Context is important. This is how we avoid the unidentified flying quote. Now, this part is something that many students struggle with. Analyze the quote and show its significance. Demonstrate for your reader how the quotation relates to your argument and explain why it's meaningful. Remember that you don't want to assume your audience automatically understands why you're using a quotation, and you don't want to let the author speak for you. Let the author back up your claim. Quotes don't speak for themselves. They need to be put into context with the thesis, with your focus. Now, in all my classes, I've posted the synthesis handout, and if I haven't, please shoot me an email, and I will put it up right away for more information. This is a little bit more information on how to synthesize sources effectively. The idea of this PowerPoint is kind of to give you the basics and then lead you to more information down the road. Now, a resource that I love to use is the Online Writing Lab, or OWL, at Purdue University. It has a great breakdown on how to paraphrase, quote, and summarize. It also has a very good resource for a guide to MLA documentation, how to do a works cited page, how to do an in-text citation, examples that are formatted correctly, all this stuff which is critical to understanding your work. In addition, I have another PowerPoint video that goes over my grading guide for my composition and lit courses. That'll show you a sample MLA paper from OWL Purdue that will be useful. Okay, so we are going to take a look at some sample paraphrases, quotes, and summaries to see how it works. Now, what I'd like you to do is, if you're watching this online, you can take a picture or a screenshot of the next slide, which will show you what we're going to use as a source. So here's the original text. This is what we're going to use for sample paraphrases, quotes, and summaries. In early times, surveillance was limited to the information that a supervisor could observe and record firsthand, and to primitive counting devices. In the computer age, surveillance can be instantaneous, unblinking, cheap, and maybe most importantly, easy. We have the author's names there, the title of the article, and this came from 126 of that article. So here's a sample paraphrase. Now this one actually needs work. The Botan and Vorvino article indicates that in earlier times, watching employees was restricted to the information the supervisor could observe and record firsthand. In the computer age, surveillance can be instantaneous and cheap. Problems with this in terms of citation. This is not okay. It's plagiarized, and here's why. Much of this is using the exact words of the authors without quotation. This is not significantly changed from the original. Even though the authors are indicated, the page number needs to be in parentheses at the end. This has come from the source, so they both need citation. Okay? Again, cite every sentence that comes from a source. So here's a fix. Botan and Vorvino claim that the nature of the workplace surveillance has changed over time, 126, so we have the page number now. Before the arrival of computers, managers could collect only small amounts of information about their employees based on what they saw or heard. Okay, now we have a citation, we have significant changes, we take the idea of the article and put it into our own words. This is an effective paraphrase. All right, moving on to a direct quote. Why is this one plagiarized? In the computer age, surveillance can be instantaneous, unblinking, cheap, and easy. This is different from earlier times when the surveillance was just what the supervisor could observe the employee doing. Bhutan and Vorvano. Okay, so take a look at this. Maybe pause the video and think about why it's plagiarized. Okay, with a direct quote, the first sentence uses the exact words of the text without quoting. We need quotation marks to indicate that we're not using our words. There's no citation after the first sentence. The first sentence comes from the source. It needs a citation. The second sentence also needs the page number. So let's fix it. Quote, in the computer age, surveillance can be instantaneous, unblinking, cheap, and easy. Bhutan and Vorvano, 126. Bhutan and Vorvano argue that this is different from earlier times when surveillance was just what the supervisor could observe the employee doing. 126. Okay, a couple things I want you to observe about this. One, these three dots, oops, let's go back, are called an ellipses, but they indicate that there's something missing from the original text, which is fine if you want to shorten a quote. However, make sure that you keep the original flavor of the text, okay? It should keep its original meaning. In other words, if you had a sentence from a text that read something like, this book was definitely not good. It was horrible. If you said this book was ... definitely good, or this book definitely ... was good, okay, that you're changing the meaning of the sentence because the original sentence said the book was not good. Another thing I want you to notice, there's a period here at the end of the original source. If it's just a period, it gets bumped to after the parenthetical citation. You wouldn't. Some students want to put a period here and here, or just after the quote. If it's just a period, excuse me, and not a exclamation point or a question mark, then it gets bumped to the end of the sentence. Okay, summary. In the article, the authors argue that surveillance has been more sophisticated in the computer age and is much better than older systems. Take a chance to reread this and pause if you need to think about why this is plagiarized. We don't know where the authors are. It just says the authors. There's no page number. We need to indicate what page it came from. So let's fix it. Here's a revised example. In their article, What Do Employees Think About Electronic Surveillance at Work? Bhutan and Vorvano argue that surveillance has been more sophisticated in the computer age and is much better than older systems. Notice that the authors' names are now in the sentence, so they don't need to be in the parentheses. Okay, so just to review what I've talked about in this PowerPoint. Plagiarism is stealing words or ideas. It can have severe consequences. General knowledge does not need to be cited, but when there's any doubt, make sure you cite the source. You need to cite both in the text and on the works cited page. And in the text, you make sure you cite every sentence that comes from a source. And there are three types of ways to avoid plagiarism: quote, summary, paraphrase. Okay, and if you're in class, there's one last slide that has an exercise that I'll get to if I am doing this with you in class. But for now, thank you for listening to this. I hope it was helpful to at least give you some resources and give you some of the basics to avoid plagiarism in an academic paper. If you have any questions after watching this, please let me know.